Just explain to me why you
So
doing this?
I'm using this wet wipe. It's just basically, the main purpose of this is just to get any dust off the surface. Actually, there isn't very much dust at all, but it just kind of, you know, it just gets rid of any loose particles. And then I'm going to go over, just with a tiny scalpel, just see if I can detect any specks that might have been left behind. There's always something you've left behind, like a tiny little hair from a paintbrush, or, you know, just specks of dust that forever fall on top of paintings. But, you know, this was finished a year ago, this painting, so it's had a year to cure the oil. So you can actually be, it's very, very resilient. I mean, you obviously treat it with respect, but oil painting is incredibly resilient. And it did have one coat of retouching varnish on it as a temporary protection. So now's the time to apply the final coat of varnish. But I'm just amazed by how little it's sunk, the oil, and how good it looks, really. That's always a very pleasant surprise when you come back to a painting you haven't seen for a while. Okay, I think that's enough. So here the lighting in here is not massively helpful to this, but you know, you're always looking at the painting at a slight angle to see if you can detect any unusual glares that have been brought up by a kind of foreign object, as it were. You know, a hair, a speck of dust. I mean, you know, there's hundreds of specks of dust that you can't worry about, but anything that really, anything that is kind of slightly disturbing to the eye, you want to get rid of it, because once you apply the final coat of varnish, they're going to shine out like Belisha beacons. That's when they're going to become really obvious. So it's one of the drawbacks of painting in oils, as anyone will know, is that oil paint is like a sponge that attracts every speck of dirt, lint, hair that's sort of floating around. And this is the best way to lift anything off. I mean, obviously I did go over this painting very, very thoroughly when it was finished, so I'm not expecting to find too much. I'm also using my hand just to feel for any irregularities. I mean, I tend to paint with very smooth layers, so I can sort of feel the difference between the texture of the paint and something that might feel more like something that's got stuck to the paint. And obviously where it's most disturbing to have these specks is in the dark areas of the painting, because, you know, you get the contrast of the glare of light against the darkness of the oil, and, you know, that can be optically quite disturbing. But actually I'm glad to say I don't think there's a lot to address here. Yeah, so for the actual varnishing, I always use Dama varnish, and I know it's become a little bit contentious now in the art world, because Dama varnish is quite tough to get off the painting. But as you know, I'm a huge fan of Dama varnish. It's been used for hundreds of years on oil paintings, and it's one of the ingredients that I use in my painting mediums. So I like to keep everything kind of fairly homogeneous and sympathetic in the painting process. And I haven't found a varnish that looks as wonderful as Dama varnish. And I have bought a surplus of equipment. So I've bought more brushes than we could possibly need. And I always feel, so these are lovely varnishing brushes, and I feel instinctively this is about the right size. You want to really have everything at the ready when you start with your Dama varnish, because you have a very small window in which to get this onto the painting, and you have to do it evenly. I'm obviously not varnishing now, I'm just feeling, this is like my warm-up, my practice run. I just want to feel how quickly I'm going to move across the painting with this brush, and this feels about right to me. And I've also got smaller brushes just in case any little windows have been left unvarnished, which sometimes happens. A generous amount of damar varnish into this container. I'm also going to sit it in here because you do get a bit of dribble and spillage, and I want to be careful of the frame. So as I'm coming in this direction, I'm going to, as this is where the brush will be travelling over across into the painting, I'm just protecting. As ever, artists' materials are very glamorous, as you can see. So that feels fine. I'm going to start from here and work upwards. And so you want to generously load your brush, but without it being incontinent, as it were. You know, you've got to control the amount of varnish. So the whole point about damar is that you apply it generously, but evenly, so you don't over scrape it. And it has a wonderful smell, which will linger in the room. So it's a good job we're doing this on a Friday, because it has the weekend to cure. Not everyone might be a fan of the smell of damar varnish like I am. So I'm actually having to lean my head very close to the painting surface to see that this is going on evenly and that I'm not leaving behind any streaks. But at the same time, you can't afford to fuss too much time-wise. So you have to really get the painting covered as quickly as possible. And it's such a pleasure to be varnishing a painting that's a year old, because this is the perfect time to do it. So, you know, it's nice to know you're technically on proper ground with this. Always have to be slightly careful of the edges, because that's where you're most likely to scrape the varnish a bit thinly. But again, keep checking, but don't slow down is the name of the game, really. And I can feel that already this varnish I applied here is already beginning to go slightly tacky. Tacky as in, that's the technical name for it. That's the technical word for it. It's slightly beginning to cure. So it's still workable, but not for very much longer. Every now and then, because damar varnish has got a lot of terps in it, you'll find that you disturb some dust that was there that you hadn't noticed, or some filament or bit of lint. So obviously try and prise that off if you spot it. And what's so beautiful about damar is that when it settles, it starts to kind of sit down on itself, as it were. So, you know, the brush marks will disappear within a few minutes. And it's like you've applied this incredibly thin layer of glass on the painting. It really is the most exquisite varnish. And it just lasts so well. I have paintings that I varnished with damar varnish 20 years ago, and they look like they were varnished yesterday. So I haven't found anything better. almost feel where you're meeting the previous edge of the varnish, because you can feel that sticky edge. You see a lot of demos on Instagram of people varnishing their paintings, and they literally pour half a bottle onto the middle of the painting and then spread it out with a brush. That is not the way to varnish a painting. Aha. Okay. Now's the quality control moment. This is where I can check any areas. And again, it's just the only way you can do this is by the light tells you everything you need to know. So the light will reveal any dry patches. And I would say I've got probably a 10-minute window where I can fiddle around a little bit, but no more. Because if you disturb the varnish layer that's beginning to cure, you risk the brush marks being left behind. And that's obviously really not what you want. So I don't know if you can see that kind of, it's almost like sort of running a hot knife through butter, and then it just kind of melts away and settles back down. It's just so beautiful. So this is another dry bit here. And as I said before, it's always the edge where you're most likely to have left a little thin scrape of varnish. And here. So this is sort of, I'm on the edge now of being able to poke around with it. I can feel this is now beginning to go fairly treacly. So very quickly, especially looking at the, rather than the edges, just focusing. There's a slightly thin area here. Just looking at the main body of the painting now, to make sure that we have it all consistently covered. Varnishing a painting is one of those things that somehow takes a lot of courage, because this is really not the stage at which you want to be getting anything wrong. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between an area where the varnish might have gone on thin and the actual texture of the painting. But obviously I know my own work, so I know what I'm looking for. That's looking pretty good. Where it's here where I started. Needs a little bit more. I'm going, so looking from this angle is no good whatsoever. Everything looks absolutely even. You always want to be looking at the painting from the angle where all the defects have been brought up by the flood of light on the painting. And it's always worth just keep looking, because you never take everything in first go. Okay, I think that's enough. I'm confident that the varnish is good now. So the only thing left to do at this stage, and not too much, only if absolutely necessary, with a tiny pair of tweezers, I'm just going to see if any monsters have been revealed. Any monsters that shouldn't be on the painting surface. And again, sometimes you don't know if they're actually embedded into the, there we go, that's one. And this could, some of this could just be stuff that's fallen, that's floating in the atmosphere in this room and has fallen on the painting. And some of it could just be something that was dried onto the painting surface but has been disturbed by the dama varnish. As I say, because it has such a high terts content, it can slightly, there we go. You're never going to get rid of all the specks of dust. So if you attempt to do that, you're on a fool's errand. So you have to learn to prioritise what's seriously disturbing on a painting surface and what's not, and kind of live and let live a little bit. I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's as good as it's going to get. So now it's a question of letting this sit for about an hour horizontally, to let the dama varnish cure to a point where there's no runniness left in it whatsoever. The dama varnish will take about a day to fully cure, maybe 2 days. But after an hour or two, the painting can actually be set vertically again, which is really good because whilst it's lying horizontally, it's vulnerable to anything depositing onto the varnish surface. And this varnish is like a sponge saying, come hither to every particle in this room. So as soon as this feels, and again, it's a matter of experience, but I can tell when the varnish feels set enough to set it vertical, and it's when you can touch it, you can feel it's tender, but there's no tackiness, there's no movement. So we're just going to hover around in the room and wait for that moment, and then we're just going to set this painting upright against the wall until it's ready to be rehung on Monday. But that's gone really well. Great.
Okay.
So this is lovely now. The dama varnish is just beginning to cure. So I can just run down the back of my finger down it without it getting sticky, with no pressure at all. But I can start to feel that glassy quality that it has, which is so beautiful. So this will take a day or two to properly cure, but it's now safe to have it upright because there's no movement in the varnish at all.
Oh, lovely.
And it just brings all the richness of the colour and the tonality out of the work.